Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about the biggest kleptocracy case the world has ever seen, and the one person said to have masterminded the whole thing, Jho Low. Let's give you a bit of background and then we'll get into what happened. This is Malaysia, a country in Southeast Asia split into two parts, the Malaysian Peninsula and East Borneo. Its capital is Kuala Lumpur, and there are about 32 million people, and its main industries are rubber and palm oil processing and manufacturing, petroleum and natural gas, light manufacturing and pharmaceuticals. This is also the birthplace of one of the greatest financial swindles in history. Now, a sovereign wealth fund is supposed to invest on behalf of the country in assets that will provide returns over the long term for the future benefit of the country and its people. Instead, the money from this fund was used to buy luxury property, high-class works of art, and invest in Hollywood blockbusting films. There were watches, diamonds worth millions, parties with A-list celebrities, oh yes, and lots of cash. The aftermath of all this has been indictments of prime ministers, court cases around the world, and an international manhunt for the people connected with it, which is still going on today. The US Department of Justice has called this the biggest kleptocracy case of all time. Let's take a step back to where it all began, and we'll introduce the various people involved in this as we go along. 1MDB started off life as Terengganu Investment Authority, TIA, and was initiated in 2008 as a sovereign wealth fund with an initial fund of approximately $2 billion aimed at ensuring the economic development of the Terengganu state. The fund's purpose was to ensure a long-term sustainable development whilst safeguarding the economic well-being of Terengganu residents. Shortly after its creation, it was taken over by the government to support the wider country rather than just the Terengganu region, and this then officially became 1MDB when Prime Minister Najib Razak orchestrated its creation. It raised approximately $3 billion more in 2009 after its special advisor Jho Low advised on the deal. Okay, Jho Low, remember that name, we'll hear a lot more about him. It didn't take long for problems to appear. As early as 2010, the Malaysian Parliament heard that the company had no business address and no appointed auditor. The fraud. So what was the fraud? How did it take place and who was involved? Well, looking at the US Department of Justice findings, we can work through a number of steps that took place. First, we had a number of companies set up. Now, these had familiar names to existing well-known investment companies, for example BlackRock Commodities Global Limited and Affinity Equity International Partners Limited. Without a deeper look and at face value, these could easily be mistaken for legitimate companies. So let's follow the money around from one set of transactions for which the DOJ has provided us with some background. In 2013, Goldman Sachs helped 1MDB to raise a bond of $3 billion. The issuance was by a subsidiary of 1MDB based in the British Virgin Islands, and it was destined for a joint venture with a firm based in Abu Dhabi. However, most of the money was instead transferred first to a private bank called BSI based in Switzerland. And the money moved again to various banks in offshore centres. Approximately $1.3 billion went through correspondent accounts of the US company JP Morgan Chase to two accounts in Singapore called Tenor Finance Corporation and Granton Property Holdings respectively. These were in accounts of the Falcon Bank. The money just spanned between these accounts, and all these transactions added to what's known as layering, which is the process whereby the original origins of the money gets disguised. Eventually, $680 million was wired to the Malaysian bank account of the then Prime Minister Najib Razak. Now, Razak says that this was a political donation from the Saudi royal family, and after about 5 months, $620 million was returned. This money then flew around between two accounts in Singapore DBS and the Falcon Bank. At one point, a wire transfer was made to a jeweller who arranged to buy a necklace for $27.3 million. And where did the necklace end up? Well, around the neck of Rosmah Mansour, wife of the then President Najib Razak. Monies that were transferred into the US typically went into trusts that were administered by law firms. Now, the client's confidentiality rules on these helps with the secrecy, and this took place through the layering process. There are many more elements to this fraud than just the transactions we've highlighted here, but so far it should give you a good idea of just how complex and difficult investigations around the world have been. Jho Low. So who is Jho Low and how's he involved in all this? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Jho Low came from a fairly wealthy Malaysian family and went to Harrow School in England. This is a very prestigious school. Previous alumni of Harrow include Winston Churchill, for example. There, he developed a close relationship with the stepson of the Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, Reza. This contact would prove key to his having access to the 1MDB fund. He then went to Wharton Business School in Pennsylvania and started to manage wealth for business acquaintances and friends through his great ability to network. How did he get into all this, and how did the fraud then evolve? Well, the first we know of this is that in 2009 a meeting took place on a mega yacht in the Mediterranean with the following people: Jho Low, Najib Razak, Najib's wife Rosmah, their children, and the hosts were none other than founders of a new Saudi Arabian company, Petro Saudi International. Within weeks of this meeting, a $2.9 billion joint venture with a Saudi company was signed, and 1MDB agreed to put in approximately $1 billion, which were most of its funds at that time. As might be resonant with our earlier description of one part of the fraud, approximately $900 million was soon wired to an account in Switzerland controlled by, you guessed it, Jho Low. He was shielded effectively by the government of Malaysia. So, for example, when whistleblowers came forth, they were arrested and effectively silenced with the full power of the state. At the time of the Saudi joint venture, Jho Low had set up a company in Hong Kong called Jinwil Capital and touted himself as an investment expert. Essentially, supported by Najib, Jho Low started to use 1MDB as his personal piggy bank. Amongst the things he bought were the Park Lane Hotel for $380 million, the Walker Tower penthouse, $51 million, a mansion, $31 million, a Monet painting for $35 million, and another later for $57 million, a Van Gogh drawing for $5 million, the mega yacht Equanimity for $250 million, and a private jet for $35 million. Oh yes, and then there were the parties and the celebrities. In 2015, the FBI issued subpoenas to several past and present employees of film production company Red Granite Pictures. This was co-founded by Najib Razak's stepson, Reza Aziz, who was also its chairman. These subpoenas were issued in regards to allegations that US $155 million was diverted from 1MDB to help finance the 2013 film The Wolf of Wall Street. Let's look at the credits of the movies. See that? Yep, Jho Low. Apparently, Jho Low was also paying the likes of Paris Hilton to party with him for a rumoured $1 million over a period of time. Just look at his party lifestyle. There were some alleged meddlings in the US election system. According to a 6th of May 2019 US Department of Justice indictment, Low was allegedly involved in a conspiracy to gain access to and potentially influence Barack Obama's 2012 campaign without disclosing the foreign origins of the money funneled into Obama's super PAC. The indictment against Low revealed that he directed transfers of $21.6 million from foreign entities to former Fugees rapper Pras in 2012 for funneling into the US election in June 21. Low was also charged by a federal grand jury for running a back-channel campaign to get the Trump administration to drop an investigation of Low and the 1MDB investment company. How did the fraud unravel? Well, the alleged fraud started to unravel in 2012 when journalist Claire Rucastle-Brown, who ran the website Sarawak Report, was handed 227,000 leaked documents. Now, these were also provided to the Wall Street Journal. The Malaysian Anti-Corruption Agency MAC began investigating and was about to issue a warrant for the then Prime Minister's arrest when Najib acted. In what was dubbed Malaysia's Week of the Long Knives, the President Najib fired the Attorney General Abdul Ghani, who had been leading the investigation, sacked Deputy Prime Minister and 1MDB critic Muhyiddin Yassin, sacked 4 other ministers who'd raised the scandal, and the MAC offices were raided and 4 officials arrested. Najib's government also refused to cooperate with investigations in the US, Singapore and Switzerland. In 2016, the Najib-appointed Attorney General cleared the Prime Minister of all wrongdoing and said the issue had been comprehensively put to rest. As the fraud grew and almost $4.5 billion was eventually taken from 1MDB, countries around the world also started to investigate as their citizens and their companies under their jurisdiction came under scrutiny. Now, the Malaysian government was eventually toppled in 2018 under an anti-corruption flag by the opposition, and this is when the fraud really started to unravel. Soon after the government changed hands, police raids took place in Najib Razak's family and friends' houses and apartments, which recovered hundreds of millions of dollars in jewellery, clothes, handbags and cash. In 2018, Jho Low also had his homes raided and went on the run. We have phone calls between him and the new government where he is trying to broker his return with little to no consequence.
I wanted you to just convey if possible to the market that I really believe that the change in government does present a real opportunity to resolve these 1MDB related issues. And I am committed to achieve that.
In July 2020, Najib was convicted of corruption relating to 1MDB, primarily by allowing Jho Low to orchestrate use of the fund's assets, from which Najib benefited massively.
This is definitely not the end of the world, because there's a process of appeal, and we hope that we would be successful there.
At the same time, in the US, Jho Low was facing civil lawsuits trying to recover up to $1 billion of assets. Now, following the US government's civil suits and also arrest warrants from Singapore in relation to money laundering through their banking system, he had an Interpol red notice put on him, restricting his travel. We hear further in his calls that he offers to return all assets if the Malaysian government would help in making the issues in Switzerland, Singapore, etc. go away.
I have given up a lot of the assets, and there's still a portion that I haven't given up. So I think if Singapore hears from Malaysia to say, look, Mr. Low is going to waive all his claims, I can do it within the next 5 days.
Okay.
Obviously, in return, then I need Singapore to lift my Interpol red notice, which they were willing to do, and that in future they can't file any new notices on me, but if they want to file new charges on me, that's their business. I'm willing to waive all my rights to all the assets, and then effectively say the Malaysian government can take all of it, and then in return, basically, I would need Malaysia's undertaking that, because of my cooperation, that this is settled and there will be no future proceedings against me and so on and so forth.
Tony Pua, as you can hear here, effectively says this is not going to happen.
I think that was his best shot in getting out of jail, but there is no chance at all that we will agree to drop all charges against him, because he's pretty much like the most wanted man in Malaysia.
There's a clear attempt to shift the blame from his actions to Najib Razak.
I just think it's unfair. Look, at the end of the day, whatever they want to say, but ultimately, I have no authority to make any decision.
And this and his attempts to walk away from the fraud the US government have called delusional. In respect of the monies that flowed into Najib's bank account, Jho Low said that there was a small proportion from King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, but this was a small proportion of the money. In other words, the majority came indirectly at least from one MDB. Now, Najib had claimed that the majority of the money was a political donation from King Abdullah. So where is Jho Low now? As we heard in 2015, after the fraud started to unravel, Low went on the run. There are many reports of him after that time moving freely in China, Macau, Thailand and various other countries in the Middle East. Low is now believed to be in China, where he travels extensively through major cities, secretly. In November 2020, Al Jazeera reported that Low was currently living in Macau in quotes, a house owned by a senior member of the Chinese Communist Party, although the Chinese have strenuously denied this. So what now? Well, this hasn't finished. A few of the countries that have had or still have criminal investigations and trial ongoing include the following: Australia, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Luxembourg, Seychelles, Singapore, Switzerland, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States. In July 2020, the High Court in Malaysia found Najib Razak guilty on 7 counts of abuse of power, money laundering and criminal breach of trust. He was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment on 1 count and a fine of 210 million Malaysian ringgits, and was also given 6 concurrent sentences of 10 years imprisonment for the other 6 charges. Najib has appealed the findings, and this is still ongoing at the time of making this video, November 21. Earlier this year, Goldman Sachs, which advised 1MDB, agreed to pay $1 billion to settle SEC charges related to the scandal. The Malaysian government have been taking steps to recover funds and assets lost in the fraud. For example, in August 2018, Equanimity was brought back to Malaysia from Indonesia and seized under Malaysian law. It was sold about a year later for just over $100 million. And 1MDB? Well, it's currently about $8 billion in debt and is being supported by the Malaysian government. Just the opposite of the original intention that the fund was supposed to be used to support the Malaysian state and people.